So I'm sure by now you've asked yourself several times why. Why do computers need ones and zeros? And that's what we're going to cover in this topic. So I'm going to take you on a thought experiment. I've seen this taught many different ways. I think what's most effective here is that we go through this thought process. So I'm going to present you with a problem, and then we're going to walk through it. Okay, so here's the problem. Feeding decimal numbers directly into a computer. Okay, so we know that computers are computing machines. They do instructions. They're going to do math. We work in numbers. Everything breaks down into numbers for a computer. So let's picture then that we're doing an addition problem. So we need to process, we're going to be processing addition. We want to add B plus C and get A. So let's say that that's 7 plus 3, and of course that equals 10. If we're going to do it from the decimal, just as you see right here, if we're going to say 7 plus 3, and we just want to load that into the machine. So here we've got the brain of the computer, and that's the CPU. And I want to take 7 plus 3, and I want to see that it always gives me back a 10. So computers have to be accurate. They have to be repeatable. So it's got to tell me it's a 10. All right, so I'm going to go and I'm going to load 7 volts. So just think of volts as it's a power. So that's the electricity running in your wall. So let's just call it that. We don't need to go too deep into electricity right now. But let's just say that we put that V after the 7, and that's going to equal some amount of power being loaded into the computer. What do I need then? Then I need a 3 loaded in, right? So I've got a 7, and now I've got a 3, and then it can go through and it can do its addition, because before then I sent in an instruction that said I'm doing an add. So let's think about this. Stop for a moment. What would 7 equal? So it would stack itself up, right? If you could picture in your mind that there's some sort of circuit in there, you don't need to know what it is, but it would stack it up and go, okay, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 volts of power. If I did the same thing with a 3, now I have 3 volts of power. And if I add those two together, so I take that 1, 2, 3 and I stick it on top of the other stack, I end up with 10 volts. So I can do a measurement then. I can say, oh, okay, 7 plus 3 is, and here's my measurement. That works fine, right? Okay, that's an interesting experiment at 7 plus 3, but we add big numbers. And this next set of numbers is not very large at all. So let's say we want to add together 4,837 plus 362. Let's walk through the same process. I need to load in this number of volts. Computers run on power. So we'll say 4,837 volts. Now stop and think about that just for a moment. How much power is running in your wall there? You ever thought about that? Your house, depending upon what country you live in, where you live at, your house runs on anywhere from 100 volts up to, could even be 220 to 240 volts. That's it. That's what's in your house right now. So that would mean if we only use the power that's available in your house by volts, you can only add numbers up to a sum of whatever the power is available in your house, which would be 100 to 240 volts. It's not very useful of a computer, is it? Imagine that you have your calculator and all you could add to, the maximum number that you could add to is 240, and that's it. It's not very useful. Let's go ahead and go through the exercise. So I'm going to stack this up. Got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to 4,837 volts. Now I need 362 volts. And I'm going to walk through the same process. I'm going to add those two together and I get 5,199 volts. Now I want you to stop right now and think about that. Think of the magnitude of what 5,199, almost 5,200 volts would mean. Your wall right now, when you plug in your computer or your lamp in your house into the wall, and it's only going to give you 100 to 240 now, imagine 5,200 volts. There is a high voltage need, obviously, if a computer was running off of that type of circuitry using decimal or counting numbers. So we would need a very large substation sitting outside of our home. Cables would have to be really huge to be able to pull in. Mostly, oh my goodness, could you imagine what some of these scientific computers would have to run when they're trying to deal with very large numbers? Or the financial world, if someone had that problem of having a lot of money and very large numbers to deal with. Imagine how big the computer would have to be. Okay, so if I've got huge cables coming in, and if I need to handle thousands and millions of volts to be able to run through that circuitry, if I'm dealing with counting numbers, that is. So I'm dealing with counting numbers. That's what's driving the power need of this. So now I need this really huge computer, even bigger than the one that we saw in the last course. It's going to generate a lot of heat. So we've got more power that we need because now we've got to cool down this computer, which means it's going to take lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of money. It's way too expensive to run. So just picture how big your house has to be able to handle this. Just the computer alone. Be a big house, wouldn't it? So there's a problem, an inherent problem with dealing with decimal number system. Decimal numbers being our counting numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way up to as far as we can count. So huge numbers mean huge voltage. That means some really serious energy bills, right? You're going to need a nuclear plant outside your home. Far too high of power requirements. It's way too expensive to build, and it's way too expensive to run, and it's just not going to fit in your house. It's too large to fit in your house, right? That's the problem. So obviously that's not a solution for us. So even though we like to count in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, maybe I'm looking at how many posts I have on my website. And let's say I have a nice big website and I have over 100,000 posts. And then I want to look at how many views I have for those posts. And I add all of that together and I take a look at what is my monthly, what's my annual. Those numbers running through your computer, if it was running on a counting system, a decimal system for voltage, you wouldn't be able to handle the computer in your house. It would be way too expensive to build. You wouldn't be able to operate it. All right, so let's go through another one. Let's look at problem number 2. Capturing the real world's continuous, infinite data. This is so important. You need to think about this right now. Stop and think about this with me. If you think about the information that runs through the world, it's a continuous flow of information, just like when you're watching the news and they have that banner and it never stops on the bottom with the information that's running through. Think about auto handling. So as you're listening to me talk right now, there's a continuous stream of audio coming out of my mouth and through this microphone, being recorded, coming out of your computer, either into your speakers or right into a headset that you have on, maybe some earbuds that you're wearing. That continuous flow of audio, or if someone is speaking to you, or you're listening to the radio, you're watching television, that's a continuous flow of information that is occurring. How do you capture that in a computer? Well, let's just talk about audio. Let's walk with me on this thought experiment, okay? We're going to talk about sound waves. Now, sound waves occur, so as I'm talking to you right now, or you're speaking to someone there in your home, as sound waves occur, what's happening is we are compressing and expanding air, all right? And then our ears can pick that up. So the mechanism within our ear is able to pick up the compression and the expansion. Now, look at that signal that's right there next to that ear. what do you see? Look at that wave. See how it's continuously flowing. It's up and down. And the amplitude of each one of those peaks at the top and at the bottom are all different, right? And that's how we hear sound, because we are modulating. It's changing that amplitude up and down, up and down, up and down. Now, as it's coming out of your computer, what's happening? So an audio file is being converted into a voltage. That voltage is going to go through the wire. So you can see the wire right there in the background. It's going through a wire to your headset. Now, wires, they're used for conducting electricity. They're perfect. That little bit of metal that runs through that wire is a perfect conductor for electricity. And that's why we use the wires. All right, so we have a voltage running it through that wire. And then inside of that headset, the voltage is vibrating the speaker. Now that voltage is an analog signal, and an analog signal looks like this. Okay, so we just saw that in the last clip. You saw how that analog goes up and down. It's continuously flowing. Notice that. Notice that it continuously moves. It's not stopping. It's just up and down and flowing, and that's how we hear. So we don't hear this choppiness. You don't hear me say, No, it's a continuous flow to it. All right, so now let's try to put that into a computing analog. So again, we have our analog circuit. And what I want to do is let's put some values on this just so that we can put it into context. So let's say our top peak is at 29.82 volts. And that peak is at 11.473 volts. Remember, we're using volts from our last exercise that we did. Computers need power, so we're going to talk in volts. And then this one is negative 5.021 volts. All right. So we know that this will be an infinite and continuous flow of information. It can't be handled accurately. Why? Why is that? Think about if your computer was able to handle continuous and infinite amount of information. Let's deal with the infinite first. Your computer only has so much memory in it. It's only so big. It only has so much processing power. Hard drive is only so big. RAM is only so big. It can only hold so much information. It can't be infinite. So the world we're living in and our field is we're trying to take a finite machine, which is a computer, and let it handle an infinite and continuous world. That's the real world. That's quite a problem to deal with. Let's move on from there. It can't be accurate because, one, we can't handle infinite or continuous flowing information. We need to be able to have a way in the computer to trigger, okay, check now, run a scan now, do this now. And that's a clock. So there's a trigger in there. It's running through. It's not a continuous thing to where, although it looks like it's continuous because it runs so quickly. However, there is a clock that's going through and triggering it, saying, do this, okay, now do the next one. And on every trigger, something is occurring. When that trigger occurs, let's just go back and look at our analog signal again. So let's focus on that second peak. The one that you see that there where it's at 11.473 volts. Now just picture when the CPU clock actually triggers. It may or may not hit exactly at that peak. Instead, it might only be 11.4. It might be 11.6. It might be 11.5273. But it might not necessarily be at exactly 11.473 volts. Now, if that did not make sense, I want you to stop right here. And I want you to think about that. This is important. think about a scan time on a computer. All right. Or even look at the clock on your wall. If you've got a clock, not a digital clock, but a clock with hands on it, with the second timer just moving, that second hand's click, 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 and it's moving around. Every time it clicks off and hits on a second, think of that as your computer's clock. It's much more fast. It's much faster than that, but let's just use that as an example. Now, you have this continuous wave of sound coming at it. You're blasting your speakers and you're listening to your music, and it's a continuous wave of sound. And it has an amplitude, it has a voltage to it. And every time that clock hits a second, ting, 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 may not always exactly pick up the peaks and the valleys and every single point on that wave, because that wave never stops. It's continuous. It's always running, just like the water. If you picture water and the waves rolling in, they just keep flowing. They don't stop. If that doesn't make sense, take a little time and absorb it. Think about that. That affects accuracy and precision. And in computing, we need computers to be accurate and precise. So that's a problem. The problems with analog right here are, ready? Accuracy. Just for that reasons that we just talked about. Precision. If that clock doesn't hit at the point where you need to read it, it might miss a little bit of information because it's a continuous flow and it's infinite. Because the world is infinite, size of memory to handle that continuous flow of information is a problem. So that's why analog's a problem. So what are we going to need? What do we need instead? All right, let's do another thought experiment. Here's what I want you to do. Ready? So think about your counting number system. Your 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. What are the smallest units? Okay. What are the smallest units? Let's think about that. So if I have a span of numbers, let's say they're infinite. In your mind, try to picture the largest number that you can. All right, you're thinking a billion, trillion, and you just keep on going, right? That's the high end of the scale. Now, if I want to break this down into the smallest units that I could use, I want to come up with a system that the computer can handle to keep the cost down, right? And to up the accuracy and the precision, to work within the framework of what our limitations are. And our limitations are the size of memory that we have, our processing speed, and just the fact that it's a finite mechanical machine. So those are all limitations. So it's got to fit within those limitations. So think about the smallest unit. Now I'm going to give you a hint. Ready? Think in whole numbers. All right? There's a 0 because 0 is a number that I don't have anything. I have a quantity of 0. Hopefully that's not your bank account, but that you have a quantity of 0. You could have a quantity of 1. Those are our two smallest units in whole numbers. Ones and zeros, ones and zeros. Think about that. You're on or you're off. It's a state. It's this or it's that. It's finite. So let's go through our addition problem again. Let's take the relatively large number that we were doing before. So we took 4,837 and we wanted to add 362 to it. Okay. So I've got my 4,837. That's a decimal counting whole number. And this could be how it breaks down into ones and zeros. Okay. What I want you to see here is that it's a different representation of the exact same number. They both mean the exact same thing. One is read by your eyes, and what we're used to counting in is, my goodness, you wouldn't want to count in that binary number every day, would you? You wouldn't want to go to the grocery store and try to read your receipt in that format. So it's just a different format, just a different symbol set to be able to break that down. All right, so let's do the next one. And we go 362, and here's the binary for that. And now I load that into the CPU. So instead of dealing with those very large voltages, instead I'm in a digital world. I can go through and I can go 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. And I have individual circuits that are able to process this. And that's how I'm able to do it. I can string together all of these individual little circuits, these individual little gates. Get used to hearing that word. So instead of dealing with this big, huge number, potentially much bigger than 4,837, instead of dealing with that on a voltage level, I can come down into a circuit, a digital circuit, and it's 0 or 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1. And I put those together, and now I'm able to process my addition. You don't need to know how that works just yet. We'll get into that. But for now, I just want to give you that big picture of why. Why ones and zeros? So what are our takeaways? Computers work on voltage. Yep, we know that. Computers cannot accurately, precisely, and consistently process analog signals. And we showed you that. An analog signal was that big continuous wave. Computers require the smallest amount of variability to be accurate. When I mean small, I mean really small. We're going to get into that later too, so that you can see what I'm talking about there when we start to get into real numbers, floating point, and so on. Ones and zeros, or on and off, are the smallest degree, that smallest unit that we want to deal with. And binary is just a representation of complex numbers. But it's in a 1 and 0 format. It's just a different way of representing it. Just like, let me give you this. Just like we speak our language, the written language is just another representation of our language. So in numbers, there's multiple different types of representation for the exact same number. And we're going to go through several iterations of those different representations.